Let me begin just keying off a point that you were making and that Craig reemphasized. One reason that I believe your initiative succeeded was not because of the wonderful capacities you've introduced in thinking about long-term capacity, in innovating between the public and private sectors. Rather, it was because of constraints on the nature of science that could be supported by the federal funding. That was the prime initial impetus. And getting back to federal decision-making beyond the year-to-year allocation, the reason the budget was flat for 4 years is because it had doubled in the preceding 5 years. And how smart is that, to double for 5 years and stay flat for 5 years? That puts all the incentives in the wrong direction. It sends all the wrong signals. It puts out incentives for capitalization, which may or may not be appropriate. And it was a true distortion. It's a reemphasis, Bob, of the point you were making about the year-by-year decision-making being inapt for the needs we have in long-term research. Now, when you couple that, though, with the federal government's aversion to anything that might even remotely resemble an entitlement, adding on top of all the budgetary woes that we have with our existing entitlements, we have one of the paradoxes that Craig was describing. I wanted to offer really 3 observations. The first, when you think about broadly incentives and innovation, if we begin by accepting that we value every life on the face of the planet equally and worry equally about the ability of science and healthcare to intervene and improve life, it's very clear that we have a gross mismatch between incentives and needs in the world for the nature of the health problems that people actually are burdened with and the degrees to which there's any incentive for investment in any problem for which there is no effective market, meaning because there's no effective way to purchase what is needed to solve the problems. So the first reality for innovation and incentives is that we have, if we take a global view, a terrific mismatch between what needs to be done and where the incentives are all aligned to have us accomplish. Second point I wanted to make, and this is also keying off the environment, the economic environment in which healthcare is on a national policy level being perceived and judged, the degree to which the cost of care is a perceived constraint is just looming large throughout every debate and discussion that we're going to have at the policy level. And if we don't find a way to adapt technological innovation in accommodating to the cost constraints, then I think we're going to find some very, very severe constraints on our ability to continue to innovate. And I think the lesson of that is that we've got to find ways to make it profitable to introduce cost-saving technology. It's got to be profitable to be cost-saving, and that may sound paradoxical, but that's what we need to do. The third point I wanted to make is that when you look at the whole line of development, from innovation and introduction of new discoveries through their maturation and ability to be tested onto their development and final product distribution, the biggest difficulty I think we have in that whole chain today is after discovery, before proof of concept to the point development of a product is possible. That is where years and millions of dollars may be required. As you well know, and Danielle Gutman, your spouse, was deeply engaged in this work, it took 7 years and about $40 million of investment in the development of Herceptin as an idea from discovery to where it was ready to be picked up by a biotech in order to be developed as a product. And that was accomplished because of the generosity of the entertainment industry, Revlon and other companies that got involved early on and put the money into a place that it could be used. We're going to need a lot more creativity and new thinking about public-private partnerships, new forms of philanthropy, new forms of capital acquisition and deployment over the long term, as you were describing, to fill that gap between discovery and product ready for development.
The title of this little session is, Can Breakthrough Science Survive Market Forces? As I think everyone knows, the way biotechnology happens is the NIH gives money to universities. I think there's an expert on the panel who said it's $28 billion. And researchers at those universities occasionally come up with some science that can be transferred by the tech transfer office of that university into something that might have commercial applicability. And so from these universities frequently spin out little tiny emerging biotech companies. From the university, they march straight forward into the valley of death, which is well named because most of those little enterprises perish there, usually for lack of funding. The ones who do survive because they're able to get to a point where they begin to attract venture capital funding, and if they're fortunate, they get to go public. Every single optimistic note that has been sounded at this conference and will be sounded at this conference and every other conference like it relies upon the fact that someone is going to make an investment in a private company who's going to take some of this brilliant research and take it to create a product that can go to a patient in the bedside. Those investment decisions are based entirely on return on investment and the expectation of return on investment, with the exception of the patient groups who invest. For everyone else, whether it's a day trader or whether it's a pension fund or a mutual fund or a venture capitalist, what they're looking at is what is the return on investment, and is it going to be a better return on investment than real estate or automobiles or chemical companies or Pepsi-Cola. The thing that I would like to contribute to this discussion is the reality that market forces and investment choices are influenced by public policy. And if, in fact, we're going to succeed in attracting, and the reality is $2 of investment for of private sector investment for every $1 of NIH investment is what's happening now in the research and development in the biopharmaceutical industry. If we're going to attract those dollars, you have to have the public policy to nurture and support and encourage that investment, not the other way around. So return on investment is a function of reimbursement policy. So when it comes to Medicare Part D and how much what is going to be the pricing structure, is it going to be set by the government? Are we going to have federally price controls? The answer to that question will determine to a very great extent whether people want to continue to invest in biotechnology companies. Reimportation policy, whether you want to allow vast quantities of drugs to be reimported from Canada and elsewhere here, has everything to do with return on investment. Patent and intellectual property policy has everything to do with return on investment. Litigation policy. We're going to probably have very soon a follow-on biologics law, which is a good thing. We're for that at Bio, to parallel the Hatch-Waxman paradigm for small molecules. If that's done well, we'll have a nice balance between the incentives for innovators and then the incentives for the generic companies to come in with follow-ons. If it's done poorly, it will have a very, very depressing effect on willingness of investors to invest in these companies. What we do about drug safety and whether we make it very, very difficult to get products through the FDA because of unnecessary and inappropriate response to drug safety issues has everything to do with return on investment. Appropriations to the FDA and what Rick was just talking about, the quality of how the FDA functions, has everything to do with return on investment. The problem is that policymakers tend to make their decisions based on very short-term time horizons. I know this because I did this for 24 years. And policymakers tend to think about the next election, the next budget cycle, the next television interview, what are they going to say at that interview, and how does that lock them into policy? Constituents complain about today. Constituents complain about their access to drugs and the price of drugs today. They complain about whether or not they have access to health care today. Constituents rarely complain about their concerns for 10 or 20 years from now and what health care will look like. When